And God, today we are grateful for your steadfast love, for your mercy, for your grace toward us. And today, as we share and we seek to encourage, would you be present with each and every person that listens and that watches? In your name we pray. Amen.
Hey, good morning. I'm so glad you joined us today. We're here with What's the Message? And the whole crew is here today because we got a lot to talk about and a very special guest. But first, this morning, I'm rolling with our good friend and colleague, Pastor. Our good friend, like I said, Baron Savori out on the West Coast. It's a special day because this is like, we're closing up this season 3 of What's the Message. Is just our chance to come on live and, talk with you as we talk about some of the things, some of the stories that have captured our interest and highlight some of these really compelling interviews and people that we meet. So it's been fun, right, Baron?
Oh, it's been a blast. It has been an absolute blast. I've really enjoyed it. I can't believe we're at the end of season number 1. It's been a really, really good year. I've grown. Season number 1 for me.
For you, season, that's right.
She's like, let's get it right. Let's get it right.
Yeah,
We've been here a whole lot longer than 1 season. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, but I have really enjoyed it growing. And today is not going to be any different. I'm excited about what we're going to discuss today, and she'll be coming on in just a little bit.
Yes. I had with this being July 4th weekend, this past weekend, it was a hard weekend. There's so many people suffering, and we were talking before. I'm kind of tired of mentioning the violence and things that have happened, and my heart goes out to the people who lost friends and family. In particular, I'm reading about the little boy who was shielded by his father and lost both parents in another senseless act. And I tell you, the more we talk about it, it just seems like it proliferates. I praise God that we went through the weekend with no mishaps. God blessed our family. We did so much this weekend. You would be proud of me. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I have said, during the week, I want to do more exercising, but the weekends, I really need to, pump it up, right? So come on, let me tell you what I did.
Come on now.
We got up, we did our walk, we rode our bikes, and then we went to a cookout kind of thing, drove all the way back home, got on our bikes, rode down to the fireworks, which was, I really felt proud of myself. But when the fireworks are over at 10:30 and you got to ride your bike back home, that was not cool. That was not cool. Even the police, they were looking at me, they're like, ma'am, you need to hurry up. Your family is leaving you. I'm like, I know. Walking my bike. Anyway, I'm trying to get it done. I'm trying to do better. So anyway, God has blessed us. He shielded us and protected us. We had amazing. It's camp meeting season for those of you who know and go to camp meeting. Still brave the heat and humidity because your spirit is looking for a word. And I sure did get it this past week. And we visited the Allegheny East Conference up there in Pine Forge, Pennsylvania. I'm headed down to Florida this weekend. And hey, if you're not there in person, why not tune in I'm going to the Southeastern Conference of Seventh-day Adventist camp meeting. Turn it on Saturday, Sabbath morning. I think you're going to get a word that you need. So anyway, I say all that to say, God has blessed us, and we're praying. It's amazing that the Lord can give us these glimpses of peace and in a world that is so chaotic. And like I said, my prayers and my heart goes out to those folks today. But listen, this week Baron. We have a very special guest. She's already on. I'm looking at her picture. She briefly came on a second ago. Lisa Sharon Harper. Listen, I've followed her for several years with Sojourners, because if you know Sojourners, the organization and the publication, Sojourners is like the A game. And I've been trying to get there for a while now, right? Sojourners and Message, the magazine, we flow in different concentric circles, but that Venn diagram, we have overlapped, right? So Lisa Sharon Harper for years worked there, and I followed her. And so I want to introduce her right now. She's a prolific speaker and writer who has led trainings on faith organization throughout the world. She is the president currently of Freedom Road US, a consulting group dedicated to shrinking the narrative gap in our nation, bringing common understanding, commitment, and action. Her work has been featured in the Huffington Post, Essence magazine, on NPR, and more. And her much anticipated book, Fortune: How Race Broke My Family and the World and How to Repair It All, just was released earlier this year. And so we're excited to discuss that today. Today, I'm trying to be like Terry Gross. Baron, we all love.
Oh, yes.
We all love NPR and Terry Gross, but this book was so compelling. And so I just want to welcome you, Lisa Sharon Harper. I love that. There she is. Good morning. God bless you. So nice to see you and meet you.
Thank you. It's really awesome to meet you both and everyone here. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
You don't know, man, I had this homework for the last few weeks so that I could make sure I could get the book done and read it in time. And so I had to tap out with the reading and just went with the audio book at the last minute so I can get the last of it done.
Hey,
so I've been listening.
That's how you get it done. Is the audio book every
done,
now and again.
All right.
It is. It's a thick book. It's a lot in there. So I get it.
Yes, this is such good stuff. And I'm going to tell you something else before we start. What I like, first of all, my sister.
Okay.
I love this because I'm looking at you. And while I wade into this book, and everybody, as you get it, and I'm encouraging you to go ahead, look it up, find it on, whether it's Audible or find it at your library, as I did. Do it wherever you can find this. Go ahead and get this, because there's something in it for each one of us, especially as people of color here in the United States. Listen, I connected with you on our family tree because I have family in my family roots go back to Eastern Maryland. Family roots in Kentucky on my mother's side.
Oh my gosh.
And Eastern Maryland and Philadelphia for my dad's side.
Okay,
right?
So yes, definitely.
Isn't that beautiful? And
yes.
Then we both have, and come on, I don't know about your childhood, but when you found out that you had a relative who fought in the Civil War,
yes.
What did that do for you? Because I had the same thing.
Yes, I mean, there is something that actually happens. There's a sense of ownership of this country. Like my family helped to make this country what it is today. We would not be here in our current state had we not had Black men, Black soldiers join the effort. Really, the Confederacy probably would have won had the Black regiments not joined the effort and been allowed to fight. And to find out actually that Henry and Abram and Randall and there was one more. I can't remember his name. But there's four brothers actually fought. Robert, sorry.
Okay.
Robert fought with the 54th, and all of them fought simultaneously, and they signed up. They enlisted in 61 before they were eligible. They signed up as free Black men. So to know that there is something grounding in that history.
Yeah, as many times as a child, I read in the history books, like you said, the history, either you had a part in the history that was, your people were enslaved, or you didn't know about the heroic stance and the work that it took to free this country. It's not just us to free this country. When we found our relative is listed on the African American Civil War soldiers.
Yes.
Same for you?
Yes, definitely. They're there. I was like, oh my gosh, there they are.
Look at it. Never in any field trip did we see these kinds of things. And so today, it's just wonderful to delve into this book, because in this book, you trace not just your history, but you weave this into, as you say, the context of everything that has been happening. And so I got lots and lots of questions, but I will, hey, let's just, talk. I'm just glad to meet you and talk today. You see our friend and colleague, Baron, he's going to jump in here too. But Great. I wanted to ask you, just to start, your book is bookended by obviously all the way throughout, but there's two very compelling stories of how race has intersected and broken not just your family, but our community at large. And so I would love if you would start and just tell us a little bit, how much ever you want to without getting everything away, but the story of Fortune and her case.
Yes.
What went into that case? How did they decide that? And the church's involvement in that.
Mm-hmm. So you have, in order to understand how Fortune became an indentured servant in 1705, you have to understand how race was created in America, because, and particularly on the eastern shore of Maryland, that colony, the first race law had been passed just 23 years before she was born. So her body, her life, her descendants, they all absorbed the wrath of that very first race law and all the iterations that came after it. So, and the first race law in Maryland came 2 years after Virginia's race law. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to give you a little bit of that context so that you understand the moment, when she's standing before that court. So back in 1660, actually, we have to go all the way back, 1630, in Virginia, the colony of Virginia, first colony, a woman named Elizabeth Key is born. She is born the daughter of an enslaved African woman and her master, Thomas Key, who was also a member of the House of Burgesses, which is the legislature in the colony of Virginia, the very first colony, English colony. According to English common law, you could not enslave another English citizen. And English citizenship came through the line of the father. So her dad is an English citizen.
Yes.
Therefore, she should not be able to be enslaved, she said. And he had her baptized and recognized her as his daughter in front of all of the community that he was in, mainly because they pushed him to, but he did. So then she said, at about 20 something years old in 1650, actually at about 20 years old, she took her case to court. And she said, I should not be able to be enslaved because my dad is an English citizen. English citizenship is passed through the father, and you cannot enslave another English citizen. And you cannot enslave another Christian, and I'm baptized. And she won her case. So a bunch of other people who were in the same circumstance, because it was a big thing, white men raping their enslaved women and having all these mixed race kids that were confusing the racial caste system, they began to say, wait a minute, my dad is also an English citizen, and I've been baptized too. And so I should not be able to be enslaved, because here's the thing, citizenship made you unenslavable.
Yes.
Okay? This is the critical thing.
Yes.
Citizenship made you unenslavable. So 2 years later, Maryland looks up and they go, we have this racial caste confusion happening here, but it's for the opposite problem. They're white women, indentured servants who are coming over from Belfast and from Scotland. And, they are now falling in love with and marrying enslaved Black men. This is something I never heard of before.
Nope.
It's the only place I ever saw it was actually in a genealogy book by this guy who made it his whole life's work to research the free Black families in Maryland, Delaware, North Carolina, South Carolina. and Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has actually then documented all the case records. And what he found is that there were 600 mixed race children born just in the colonial era, just in Maryland and Delaware alone.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, all to white women.
Okay.
So these are all the documented mixed race kids. Now, mixed race kids that were born to white men would not have been documented. Okay.
Right.
So, but there's 600. So this is a big deal. A lot of white women are doing this, marrying enslaved Black men. So there's the way that they solve that perceived problem on the ground, because that's all legislatures do, is they're passing laws to solve a perceived problem on the ground, is they pass their first race law. And this is what it says. It says any white woman who gets married to and has children with an enslaved Black man will herself be enslaved until the death of her husband, and her children shall be enslaved in perpetuity. Somebody say forever.
Oh my goodness.
Like
Forever.
as in children and children's children and children's children's children to the 1,000th generation and beyond, they will be enslaved. So by the time Fortune is standing before that court in 1705, the race law has shifted. They've kind of backed away from that. We're going to, mainly because favor that was done for the servant of Lord Baltimore, the guy who actually ran Maryland, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he had a servant that he brought over. She fell in love with a Black man named Charles. And she said, can you please change the law so that I can get married to him? He jerry-rigged the law. She got married to him, although it was a little bit too early because the law hadn't changed yet. So she ended up being enslaved, and her children were enslaved all the way through to the Revolutionary War. Then they were finally set free when the America won, right? But when Fortune is standing before that court in 1705, the way that the law has shaken out at that point is to say,
and Fortune is your 7th great grandmother.
Yeah. Fortune is my 7 times great grandmother.
Okay.
She was, she's my 10 times great grandmother.
Okay. Wow.
10 times great grandmother. Her mother, Maudlin, was from Belfast. She's my 11 times great grandmother. Her father, Sambo, aka Sambo, Game, is my 11 times great grandfather. And he's from Senegal. We believe he's from the region where Senegal, Mali, and Guinea meet, because that's where the name Sambo would have been. It's a Wolof name. And it means second son.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's standing there, the product, a love child. They had an affair of this mixed race union that is exactly in the target area of the first race laws. And so they indenture her until she's 31, because the law has shaken out to say, if your mother is white, you cannot be enslaved if you have a mixed race union, but you will be indentured. And the time of your indenture depends on whether they are married or not. If they are married, you'll be indentured for 21 years. If they are not married, you'll be indentured for 31 years. So hence, she was indentured until the age of 31. Now, the thing about the church, how the church figures into this, is that about halfway through, go back to the day when they first passed that first race law, right? Well, what they did not foresee, but happened pretty quickly, is that the planter class saw an opportunity here. Yeah. Because they saw an opportunity for free labor in perpetuity, right? Yeah. So they began to force their indentured Irish and Ulster Scot women to marry and have children with enslaved Black men. And that, by forcing them to do that, they then made those women subject to the law, meaning they then became enslaved and their children became enslaved forever to these masters. So, maybe a couple decades later, the legislature looks up, the General Assembly, and says, we didn't expect this to happen. And this is a Catholic colony, so they're clutching their pearls. And they say, okay, instead, what we're going to do is we're going to now take the keys of indenture and enslavement out of the hands of the planters, because they have, some interest here. We're now going to put the keys into the hands of the church. So the church becomes the main arbiter of the crushing of the image of God in the colony of Maryland. The main one that keeps the most accurate records, more accurate than the courts, and determines whether or not somebody can be enslaved or will be enslaved or not. And sometimes people are, and they also hold slaves and they have indentured servants. Yeah. So it's very likely actually that Fortune was indentured to her parish for the first 18 years of her life, or she was free, but we don't know where would she live? And then was warded to Miss Mary Day. Yeah. Now, Mary Day was gentry class, and that means that she was, up in the court. She was a member of the court of the queen or the king at the time that she came to America. She was gifted a bunch of land by the first Lord Baltimore. In other words, all of Southern Maryland was hers. Wow. And Fortune ended up being indentured to her. I went down to the land and I found Game Road, which is likely where Fortune and her descendants lived for 2 to 3 generations. And that was actually the tip top of Mary Day's land. Yeah. 2 successive generations after Fortune were also indentured because of those race laws. And I believe that, and I know this, I know that there's some foul play here because I did a little DNA matching, just simple DNA matching with Ancestry.com, and looked for the surnames of the indenturing families Day and Fuchs, and found other family members' DNA matches with those same surnames in their trees. That is not a common thing. You don't just get surnames to get surnames. You get surnames if there's a connection. Okay. So it's likely that 2 to 3 generations were raped by the men in the indenturing families. And that's how the children came to be. The next descendants came to be. And that's why they also were indentured for 21 years, not 31 years, because their fathers were white. And by the time they were born, the race laws had shifted again to say 31 years if your father is Black, 21 years if your father is white. Yeah. Yeah. Whew. It's amazing. The history is so, and I wonder, I'm not looking right now. I don't know. We have one of our viewers, she and her husband, the Singletons. They were Alvin Singleton volunteered to look into my history and to find the history that, I was just telling you. But, I just had to take a moment just to rest when you talk about, even though we know this is true, but you talk about the incentive and the interest that people had to make their own slaves. Yes. That makes no sense to me. You have a child and you decide you're going to subject them to the worst in the history of humanity kind of slavery. And this is your own flesh and blood. Oh, but here's the thing. They did it for the free labor. It's not like they had the children and then said, oh, should I or should I not? No. They raped in order to gain free labor. Yeah. And they raped to dominate. They raped to show who is boss here. That's what they did. Yeah. And you point out in the book that indentured servitude, it was not, it's not a shade different. It is supposedly had a stopping point. That's right. The conditions were the conditions were very much the same, right? Yeah. I used to think of indentured servitude as kind of like a bad job with poor pay, or no pay. Like you're just going to work it off. But, basically people are nice to you. It's just, you just got to work in order to pay off your debt. That's always been how it's been explained to me, in classes, civics classes, whatever. Yes. No. In fact, the enslavement system that we grew to have in the antebellum era, it grew out of the indenturing system. So in the first 100 years from most of the 1600s after the first colony was established, most of the system was indenturing. So those first 20 and odd Angolan Africans that were brought here in that death ship, the White Lion in 1619, they were mostly indentured, not enslaved. Now, the only difference, though, was that there was a timestamp.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an end point, but indentured servants were quartered if they tried to run away, as in they were torn from limb to limb.
Yes.
Literally torn apart.
Mercy.
And their limbs placed on different corners of the plantation or in the area. They were beheaded. They had ears and hands cut off if they tried to run, fingers chopped off if they tried to steal something. They were whipped regardless of their ethnicity, whether they were Native American, Irish, Ulster Scot, or African. That was what happened to indentured servants.
Yeah.
Only difference between slavery and indentured servitude was the timestamp and the way that Black people were indentured, as opposed to people of European descent, which is how it kind of morphed into Black slavery.
Right.
Is that people would kind of conveniently not write down the beginning date of a Black indentured servant's service. Mm-hmm. So they would just keep them. And forever. The courts couldn't prove that they had been there for however long. Mm-hmm. So they would just be indentured forever, kind of by default.
Yeah.
This is absolutely fascinating. It's infuriating in some ways.
Yeah.
It's so informative. Now, you mentioned earlier how the church played a role in record keeping and enabling or empowering this to kind of continue to carry on. What other faith groups during this time in that region were they just silent? Did they not really work together? Were they also co-signing? And kind of the faith perspective was intriguing to me.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, thank you for digging deeper into that, because that has been an interesting pieces of information that I've gathered about church history and slavery just in researching Fortune, like just in her family. So what I found is that churches, particularly the Episcopal Church, they were really the keepers of the parishes, even though this was a Catholic colony. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but it is true that the Episcopal Church was kind of the main people who the courts warded people to and who held those papers. But it wasn't only limited to Maryland. Pretty soon after, that practice became the practice in Virginia. It became the practice in all of those main colonies, those original colonies. William Penn was a Quaker and owned slaves, right? So back in the 1600s, the Quakers had not yet, and actually most of the 1700s, the Quakers had not yet declared, we will not own slaves. We will not enslave people. So when I did this history, it blew my mind to find on two separate lines of my family, my people were owned by Quakers. Two separate lines on my father's side and my mother's side.
Wow.
We hail back to Quakers who owned my family. One in Barbados, the Weeks Plantation in Barbados, and two, Leah Ballard in South Carolina. The Ballards hail from David Ballard, who was from that Hampton area of Virginia. Okay. And he moved his family south to South Carolina, I believe, in order to be able to own slaves, because he ended up having a big plantation and being one of the founders of Camden, South Carolina, which is where my family was enslaved by his people.
Yeah. Well, the church's complicity in this makes this story of race in America. So when you subtitle your book, How Race Broke My Family in America, there is no reason why this is hard to understand and see. When you talk about the physical trauma, you talk about the emotional trauma of having to be separated from family, from not even being able to have the natural bonds of family. There's no reason why that should be a mystery to anybody. I think the thing that, and not to skip over hundreds of years of really compelling family history, because you go through it all. You talk about not just your African American roots, you talk about your Native American roots, you talk about folks down in the Caribbean, and you not just talk about about what slavery has done, but you talk about the abuse and the sense. I wish you could say a little bit more about that, because I'm not sure that many times people understand the link. Both my white brothers and sisters don't know whether that link is still active. And I think sometimes we as people of color dismiss the effects of racism on our current day family structures.
Oh, yes. Well,
I said too much there. I'm sorry. It's
no,
conversation. Okay.
no, you didn't. No, you didn't. You showed me where you want to go. So this is helpful. And what I would say, first of all, just to say that going back to the church quickly to wrap that up, not only did the church become the arbiter, not only did the church become basically the auctioning block of the enslavement era in the colonial America, but after the Revolutionary War, half of the church split off, and said, we're going to keep enslaving people, while the other half of the church, every single denomination in America, split over the issue of slavery in the years leading up to the Civil War. Every denomination split.
Wow.
Every last one. So we all know the story of the Southern Baptist Convention that became a denomination because of that split. But it's not the only one. The Methodist split, the Presbyterian split, every single one split over the issue of slavery. So we could say, self-righteously, well, half of the church said no. So there was a witness, and that is true. Half of the church said no. We do not believe in slavery. We do not believe it is possible to be an owner of an enslaved person and still be a member of the kingdom of God. No, you're not under the rule of God if you are owning the image of God. Hello, somebody, right?
Yeah.
So that was half, but the other half of the church established denominations where they could twist the theology and the understanding of ecclesiology so that they could not only own slaves and go to church or even be a pastor, but they could be a missionary, taking the message of the good news of Jesus, brown Jesus, by the way, colonized Jesus, by the way, serially enslaved people that Jesus came from, by the way, take that good news and take it around the world while owning slaves. That's what happened in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And so now, getting to what are the connections? I mean, one of the things that I saw was just the constant theme of exploitation. The reason why, when you look back, we tend to oversimplify or hit the wrong target when we talk about the problem of race in America. We talk about it as a problem of hate.
Yeah.
Talk about it as a problem of maybe bad morals. We talk about it as a problem of people needing to be reared better, so that, or even not being around enough Black people of color, so they just don't know. No,
right.
Never has that been the case in America, ever, because whites were the minority when they first got here. Yeah, but everybody else was Native American, right? And then very soon, 10 years after the establishment of the very first colony, we had those very first African Angolan people. So we have always had a presence here. So it's not, not having enough exposure. It has always been in every generation of my family. I could see it. Exploitation, the exploitation of free and no cost labor.
Yes.
Or the exploitation of our bodies in order to, or cordoning off of our bodies in order to exploit the land. It is always about the money, and not everybody's money. It is always about white men's money. White men's money. Because remember, even white women couldn't own a bank account.
Right.
In fact, they couldn't even have their own credit card until the 1970s. Right. So when we ask the question of what is all this about, it is about white male dominance, which is why January 6th happened.
Okay, come on.
Which is why we have the suppression and not only suppression, but subversion of the votes in this election and in 2024 that they are openly planning. They are passing the laws in all these legislatures around the country right now in order to what? To get back white male dominance, because they haven't had it since the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. That was a game changer. That was the game changer. And they have been fighting that ever since. And let me bring up this last ruling on Roe.
Yeah.
That's what that was about.
And people don't understand that. People don't see it. We're so far removed from the genesis of that movement that that's all we can see. I wish you would tell people a little bit about your experience as it relates to the pro-life movement and the Christian church. I found that interesting.
Yeah, well, and I say this with sensitivity because I know that, I mean, even in our communities, there's a real broad spectrum of thought around the question of abortion, and especially among people of faith, right? Like, and rightfully so. There should be a broad spectrum of thought, but there has not been allowed to be a broad spectrum of thought since 1983.
Okay.
And you can name the year because that was the year that the religious right was born. Religious right as a movement was born in 1983. You know what else happened in that year? Just about a month before they were born, they lost a Supreme Court case.
Right.
Do you know what Supreme Court case they lost? It was kind of in some ways like the last gasp, the last fight against Brown versus the Board of Education.
Right.
It was the last gasp fight for them against the Civil Rights Act and the titles and the legislative regulations that came as a result of that, which stands on Brown versus the Board of Education. It was the case of Bob Jones University versus the United States of America. And Bob Jones University was trying to protect pure white space. They were, in essence, kind of the flagship race school. They had been established way before the civil rights movement and race schools began. But because they had been established, the race schools took their model as a model. So they were like, if anybody came after them, you were coming after them all. And the IRS sent them a letter in the early 1970s saying, you're about to lose your tax exempt status because you are no longer in compliance with Title XYZ, which is a part of the Civil Rights Act, because you have segregated space. You don't allow anybody but white people to apply to your school.
Right.
So they ignored it for a while. And then the IRS said, hello, we're coming knocking. You are about to lose your status. So they said, oh, okay. All right. So we're going to allow our janitor. I swear to you, one Black man, a janitor, to enroll in the school. And he did it. And he didn't even last 1 year. He said, I am out.
I'm out of here.
I'm out of here. I'm out. Right. So
I am not your Negro. Okay.
Right. Exactly. I am not your Negro. And so they said, so they got another letter from the IRS saying, you are still not in compliance. Even with this one person in there, you're not compliant. So they said, okay. You know what we're going to do? We're going to allow married Black people to enroll in our school, but they have to be married because we don't want any mixing of the races, because according to our faith, and they're fighting us on the basis of religious freedom, our faith says you cannot have a misogynization of the races, right? So they allow married people. IRS still comes knocking and says, you're about to be revoked here. And so they say, okay. We will allow single Black people to come onto our campus, but they have to sign an agreement that they will not date while they are enrolled here. And
anyone?
Anyone. They will not date. And any white people who enroll now have to sign an agreement that they will not be in compliance. They will not be a supporter of mixed race dating. If they become a supporter, if they align with, say it's okay, they will be immediately expelled according to this thing that they have to sign.
Wow.
So the IRS says, we're taking away your status. So they took away their status and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 1983, they lost.
Yeah.
Now, you know who came to their rescue, who tried to come to their rescue, tried to like prop them up and say, no, this is right. They need to be able to do this. They didn't do it on the basis of race because they said, well, after the Civil Rights Act, they can't do that. But you know what they did? They did it on the basis of religious freedom. Right. And it was people like Pat Buchanan and it was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan said, I support Bob Jones University in his campaign speeches. And the very first thing he did when he became president was to visit the campus of Bob Jones University in support of their fight. Okay, that's Ronald Reagan.
To keep all white spaces. And so you make that link from there to abortion.
Now here it is.
Smoking gun. Come on.
1983, they lose the fight. Now it's been about 3 years since abortion. People have begun to start to protest the rise in abortions. Now it's not really, honestly, it's not a rise. It's a rise in the counted abortions, because before Roe v. Wade, they didn't count abortions. They didn't have a counting measure, right? It was all done underground. But now we're seeing it. So the church started to get a little agitated, even though the church supported it in the very beginning. And so they took advantage of that. They said, okay, we're starting to see abortion is a possible way that we can fight the Supreme Court. So they took aim. They said, we can't fight on the basis of race anymore. In order for us to win back white male dominance, we have to overturn the court. We know that. We have to get a conservative court, because the last time we had a fully conservative court, we got Plessy versus Ferguson.
Okay.
Which was separate and equal. Yeah. Right? And so that was overturned by Brown versus the Board of Education. We need to get back to Plessy versus Ferguson, but we can't do that with a mixed court or with a liberal court. So we need a conservative court. Now, how are we going to get a conservative court? We have to get another issue that can be fought through the Supreme Court. Well, we saw the win of Roe versus Wade. We need to get Roe v. Wade overturned. And in order to get Roe v. Wade overturned, we have to get a conservative court. When we get that conservative court, we'll have what we need to overturn Brown v. Board.
Yeah. See, now, Lisa, Sharon, Harper, you just scared the socks off of all of us. Thank you very much. Because now we're seeing, you pulled back the curtain.
The veil,
as, we're the veil as we unmask some of the motivations behind this. And it's very, very disturbing. One thing, and I'm sorry, Baron, I'll be quiet after.
No, you're good. You're good.
One thing about, as you retell and you recount this history and you talk about this, I am struck at how candid you are at calling out sort of Eurocentric action and actors and thought. Yet you grew up and came to Jesus in the evangelical church.
Yes, so I did.
I think that is so interesting to me about your life, because you were taught. You were taught by the folks who are really leading the charge, especially in the pro-life movement. Where did you find your Black voice and your activist? And I know you already had it because your family, but something in you had to wave it.
So, I mean, thank you for mentioning, I already did have it, because I did. It was instilled in me as a child. My mom was a member of SNCC. You read that in her chapter 6. She dated Stokely Carmichael, like Black Power man.
I didn't get the fact that she was dating him.
Yeah, she dated him. Hey, they were serious for like a little bit,
Oh, there's a good looking. Okay, go ahead. That's another conversation.
Tommy Teray. Hello, somebody. Yeah. And I know I am not his child. It's like, that's not happening. I know my dad is, Dennis Weeks, Weeks family, whatever. But anyway, they dated. They were serious. But my mom was very much, and my dad, very much a part of that Black freedom push of the 1960s. Her push was here in the North. In fact, she helped to open the first Northern office of SNCC in Philadelphia here, and became their church outreach organizer, which blew my mind, because that's what I did with Sojourners without even knowing that's what she did for SNCC. I was like, what?
Amazing.
So I know. So I had it. But then we moved down to Cape May, New Jersey. And when I was in seventh grade, and you know what you do when you're a kid, you try to blend in. Like you try to acclimate in order to belong, in order to be welcomed. So that's what I did. I cut bangs. I didn't even know what bangs were before I moved down there. They stuck out like that. You know, they didn't really work.
Back in the 80s, that's how we had
hot comb. We didn't really know. We didn't know what we were doing back then, right? So we did the hot comb, you know, and I straightened my hair. I didn't know what my hair looked like actually underneath the straightening and the perms and the Jerry curls. Hello, somebody.
Hello.
Back in the 80s. And so, and then, you know, became deeply, deeply involved in the white evangelical world, both in high school, in my youth group, but especially in college and Campus Crusade for Christ, which is like the heart of white evangelical America. And then, but it's ironically, it is in that space that I was first reintroduced to myself through an urban project that I did, an urban summer project. In other words, I went for the summer to New York City with about 50, 60 other college students to learn about how God loves the city. And what I really ended up learning was how much God loves Black people. And one of the books that we had to read was John Perkins' With Justice for All. It's on your shelf. Yeah,
right there.
On myself too, right?
So I told you were my sister. Go ahead, keep going.
It's a classic, right?
Yes.
So that book, that book and Let Justice Roll Down, both of them really like shed light for me on justice, just this whole question of race and justice. And I came back to my Campus Crusade chapter, a different person, and joined the Rutgers University with the homeless club, and you know, and started to try to get my evangelical white Christian friends involved with the fight against homelessness at the end of the 80s. If you remember, that's kind of when homelessness exploded. But I still was very much a part of that world. But still, even as a part of that world, I began to focus on what they called racial reconciliation in the 1990s. And it was in that context, in the early 2000s, that I took my very first pilgrimage, this time with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, another college ministry where I was now on staff as a campus minister. And I took a pilgrimage called the Pilgrimage for Reconciliation. And it was a pilgrimage through the story of African Americans on American soil from slavery through civil rights. And it was there that I began to really see the impact of systems and structures on our families, on our people. I came to the end of that summer asking myself, would my understanding of the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, which up to that point had really been defined by Campus Crusade's 4 spiritual laws, you know, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, but you are sinful and therefore separated from God. But Jesus has died to pay the penalty for your sin. And all you need to do is to pray this little prayer and you get to go to heaven. If I were to share that little gold booklet with Leah Ballard, the last enslaved woman in our family, who had 17 children and was likely what they called a breeder in South Carolina. If I were to share that little gold booklet, would that make her jump and shout for joy? Would she receive that as good news? That's what that pilgrimage messed me up. And I went into depression for the next year because the answer was no. And if the gospel as I understood it would not be received as good news to my enslaved ancestors, then it wasn't good enough. And maybe it wasn't Jesus's gospel after all. So that's what actually led me into what really has become 18 years of going deep into the biblical concept of shalom. That led to the writing of my last book, The Very Good Gospel, which really kind of outlines what have I found as I've done this exploration. And it's changed everything for me, everything. And so I have no qualms, none at all, to call it out and to call the names of the people who were telling the lies. Because we have to understand how we got here. In order to repent and change and walk another direction.
Yeah. We only got a few minutes left. I could talk to you. In fact, one day we need to have lunch or something. I
Let's
don't know
do
what it is because I just feel really connected in the story. And I think it's the art of you telling this story in such a way that we all get it. And I think the spirit, that's the beauty of our faith experience at this point, especially for me, is how the spirit has been able to guide Black people through all this mess.
Yes.
What?
Yes,
What?
yes.
How do we still get it? How do we still hear him over and above and through all of that? And so that's where I am. And I find that is even more precious every day when we see that, the links that God would go to or through to make sure I still get it, even though other people have defined it a certain way. But I want to say that, go ahead.
Just one last thought is that, even in addition to seeing the theme of white dominance and the way that this all happened is because white men's lust for power. I hope you saw that in the book, I didn't center white people. I centered us.
Yes.
And one of the things that Dr. Ruby Sales, who would kill me if she knew I actually used her doctor, but what she said to me when she read the book, which surprised me because I hadn't seen it myself, is that actually the more important theme that is woven throughout the book is resilience, that our people have been resilient and they have found a way to fly over and through all of that mess. And you see that in every chapter. You see it in Fortune's chapter, how the children come back, they find their parents and they live with them. And so family structure, even though it's broken up by indenture, they figured out a way to come back together. You see it in the calling of the names after the Civil War, that people went hundreds of miles looking for their families in order to get that basic sense of strength back, the family. You see it in the rise of the boomer generation and also the silent generation that began and ended the civil rights movement, that moved us over the line so that we could actually win the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act. And we see it now. We see it now in the Black Lives Matter movement. We see it now in the poetry of Amanda Gorman. We see it now. We see it now in the current day struggle right now, as we are rising up against voter subversion.
Yes. Baron, you better get in here because I got one more question. Because I'm hogging all the time.
It would probably send us in a totally different. Well, let me ask this: Freedom Roads and the organization that you're a part of. As I was kind of going through the website there's something that caught my mind. You're seeking to design experiences and to teach people and to help them through different conversations about beginnings, origins, about race and different things like this. But it says specifically, this is not diversity training. Would you just kind of share a little bit about what it is that you're currently doing, besides being an amazing historian and storyteller and sharing the story through writing as well? Tell us a little bit about Freedom Roads.
Yeah, well, Freedom Road began in 2017 when I left Sojourners. And our flagship thing that we do is we seek to shrink the narrative gap in America and in the church, to help us to see the ways we've been conditioned to understand how we got here in one way. And that's what's actually leading our public policy, our vision of what it will take to become great, or to gain some kind of peace. Well, if we understand really what happened and more of us understand it, we'll be able to shrink the gap between our narratives, have common vision, common understanding of the problem, and seek common solutions. So we do that through consulting and coaching and training. We do training. And we also do pilgrimage. So one of our favorite things to do is pilgrimage. And we just 2 weeks ago concluded a 1-week pilgrimage with Trinity UCC. They contracted us to do a pilgrimage. We ended up having 200 people on this pilgrimage. I swear to you, 195 people, 4 buses over 5 days in South Carolina, where we pilgrimage through a custom designed pilgrimage we did for them, but now we can do for anybody. called Establish 1619, where we go through the entry, the subjugation, the rise and rebellion of people of African descent on U.S. soil from slavery through Reconstruction, and only looking at it through the lens of Charleston. So all of our pilgrimages, because of our story, the way that we center narrative, all of our pilgrimages are story-based. We are rolling through a narrative of a people and soaking in their narrative for usually about a week at a time. So we do DEI contracts with. We just finished one a few months ago with Friends Committee on National Legislation. We're working right now with the Carter Center, not to do DEI training for them, but rather to consult with them about how they can leverage the evangelical roots of their founder, Jimmy Carter, to help evangelical institutions to engage in truth-telling now, to engage in that truth-seeking and truth-listening and truth-telling journey that needs to happen for our nation to heal.
Okay, so first of all, that's beautiful. And we need to, before we leave, I want to make sure that people know how to get in touch with you. Should they want to go on one of these pilgrimages or for their organization. But so you can't leave us here not knowing. Give us something. I know in the third part of the book, you give us some, I won't say tips, but some good soaking on repair. And I would love, as you take us out with, give us the best that we can take away today.
Okay. Well, I will say that after, all of the family story is shared in the first two parts of the book, the book closes with the third section. It's on how do we repair what race broke in the world. And it stems around these three concepts. The first is the concept of truth-telling, which involves truth seeking, truth listening, and then truth telling what you have heard. And then that must move into a process of reparation, repair. Reparation is a biblical concept. It's also one that we have deep roots and precedent for in America. African Americans are the only group in American history that has never received reparation for the oppression we experienced on this land. Every other people group that has experienced oppression here has received some measure of reparation. Only us. Right. We are the only ones. Why is that okay? It's not okay.
It's not okay.
It's not okay. So reparation must come. And then for the sake of those who have been oppressed, as we must find ways to live together in common space with those who formerly oppressed us, there must be some level after reparations has been made to forgive that which cannot be repaired.
Yeah.
To release our debtor of their debt for the communities that were utterly obliterated and will not be restored, for the lives that were absolutely lost and they will not rise again. They're not going to resurrect. They're dead. And we need to face that, and we need to release that debt, because if we demand that they restore the communities that were broken up in the 1950s or the 1970s, or even a decade ago, we are the ones who will go to our grave in deficit, because they can't. We're demanding something that can't be brought back, but they can bring back, they can repay the wealth that was stolen. They can repay and repair the systems and structures that created the gap in the first place. And they can establish institutions that cause our flourishing, that give us the ability to flourish from henceforth. But for those things that can never be repaired or restored, we need to forgive. And that's a call from Bishop Desmond Tutu. It's also from an amazing book called An Ethic for Enemies by Dr. Donald Shriver from Union Theological Seminary. And so those are two of the big pieces in that last chapter on forgiveness. But I want to end, I'd like to conclude with just reading the last page of the book if you will.
Go ahead. Oh, I mean, yes, go ahead.
People ask
different things to different people. Go ahead.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay. People ask me, what is it you hope to gain from this book? What do you hope will happen? This is what I hope will happen.
Yeah.
There are two paths set before the oppressed. One path leads to rage, compounded pain, sickness, and death. The other leads to the beloved community.
Yeah.
On that road, there is truth seeking, truth listening, and truth telling. There is reparation and equity, and there is mercy, release. For the sake of my body and soul, and the bodies and souls of my family's descendants to the 10th generation from me, I choose the beloved community.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for readers in European bodies, you also have a choice. You can continue your war for supremacy against the image of God on earth. You can resist God's beloved community, resist truth, resist equity, resist justice, and resist mercy. You can try to maintain your space at the top of a crumbling racial hierarchy. You won't be there long. You are already in the global minority, and within one generation, you will be in the minority in the United States as well. And when that day comes, you can wage war, or you can lean into truth, lean into repentance and repair, and allow yourselves to be released, forgiven. Only then can we find a new way of being together in the world. I can almost hear my 7th great grandmother, Fortune Game McGee, who walked this land 10 generations ago and absorbed the wrath of its first race, gender, and citizenship laws into her traumatized body. In my mind's ear, I hear her whisper, "Yes, child. Yes."
Yes. Yes. Lisa Sharon Harper, thank you so much for joining us. She's the author of Fortune, How Race Broke My Family and the World, and How to Repair It All. Yes, you all go out and get this. Yes, child. Yes. Not only that, she is the president of freedomroad.us. And is that how people can find you at freedomroad.us?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. freedomroad, all one word, .us. Go ahead and find, you all know you work somewhere where they might need to go on a pilgrimage. That's all I'm trying to say. Okay, look. People, we've gone a little over, but this was so rich. This is so transformative. Thank you, Baron Savory, for rolling with me this season. Thank you for capping it off, Lisa Sharon Harper. Hey, what's the message? We'll be back after a while. In the meantime, keep in touch with Message. Pray for Message. Go to messagemagazine.com, sign up for our newsletter. Don't forget that we are in a season of sharing, and you can share Message, the magazine, with someone who may be incarcerated or someone who you might not even know, and it can bless their lives. Don't forget to pray for us. Follow us on social media, and let's continue this conversation. We look forward to hearing from you. God bless. Take care.